I'm going to read just a few minutes of a story called The Boundary from my new book, Elmer and Psycho. Scarface was obnoxious, but he had charisma. The first time I met him, he showed me a coffee can with dead tadpoles in the bottom. He offered to sell them to me with the coffee can for $10. I drove him home from Madrigal to the res. He asked if, when I bought my car, it came with the engine. I said, it came with the engine. Then he asked if it came with the key. I admired his directness. Listen, you're a hippie, he said. Can you get me some weed? You want me to get you some weed, I said. If you get me some weed, I can get you commodities. Peanut butter, apple juice, powdered eggs, whatever you want. Dream on, I said. If you get me weed, I'll make you breakfast. You know what I mean? Scarface smiled benignly. I didn't answer. How could I? He was only 12. Just outside town, I turned up a stretch of road that ran through hills and gullies that bloomed with wild mustard and fennel and cow parsnip and the carcasses of American-made cars named after wild horses. One end of the road opened onto the res with its HUD houses and rose bushes where Scarface lived. On the other end stood the Assembly of God. In between, we passed a ranch where a wealthy couple from Los Angeles had brought hundreds of wild, rare birds. Immediately, the turkey farm across the road sued them for bringing in exotic bird diseases, and someone shot their dogs. You're saying I'm ugly, Scarface shouted. Huh? 'Cause I'm packing heat. He pointed to his penis. This was a test. Scarface was as ugly and enormous and threatening as possible for a person his age, not yet full grown. His face looked like a knife wound, but beautiful too. I have to keep my eyes on the road, I lied. If you get me some weed, I'll forgive white people for all the injustices done to them. Scarface, I said, how could you forgive white people? He looked out the window at the dusty plain of the turkey farm and said, if I didn't know how to forgive white people, I wouldn't have no family or friends. It was true. Scarface's own father had shot and killed 2 men in a state of such profound drunkenness that at the trial he couldn't name the crime, the men, or his reasons. He lived in prison, the worst one. Scarface's mother did odd jobs with men. Scarface couldn't really read. He spelled his own name, Scraffit, on a piece of paper that he gave me with his telephone number on it. I don't know what they did with him in 5th grade. He still held his pencil in his fist. I would have liked to take Scarface away and made him mine, but you can't do that. Whatever my reasons were for wanting Scarface, I knew they were the wrong reasons. I bought him pickles and jerky and donut holes at the gas station and loved him the way you might love someone for their money or their beauty. Around the time I started my gig with artists in the schools and got to know Scarface, the year of my own messy and depressing separation, my sister Carrie called from the Democratic Republic of Congo, where she'd been teaching in a private school. Her life, she said, had become worthwhile and exciting. She'd forgiven me for being one of the neglectful figures from her childhood. In fact, she invited me to come and visit. She spoke of the political situation, about the most recent eruptions. The State Department began to worry about her kids, diplomats' children, and children of the ruling families being sitting ducks. Then all they did at the school was to postpone a field trip to the Capitol, where rape and machetes were of concern. That sounds dangerous, I said. We went to see the bonobos, Carrie said. A few weeks later, Carrie called again to say she'd been evacuated and had moved to another country in Africa where she was doing important work with Doctors Without Borders, treating girls and women with fistulas, ruptures, and internal damage from rape, long labors in childbirth, or babies too large for their child-sized birth canals of the young or malnourished girls. The damage had rendered many incontinent. They'd lost the wall between vagina and anus and lived in shame. "You should come," Carrie said. "Then you'll see." Scarface knew about bonobos from watching the Discovery Channel. Bonobos were his favorite kind of ape. They could pick up a teacup with their toes and drink from it. They didn't force the females to have sex with them. They fucked by agreement. Scarface put a bonobo in the mural, even though we'd agreed not to deviate too much from the sketches we'd made or from our local history theme. We'd agreed to depict salmon and kelp, redwoods and roundhouses, Pomo women weaving baskets from redbud and willow, and men dressed for dancing in flicker headbands with feather skirts. Painting the mural was supposed to help kids like Scarface reclaim their own narratives. I'd written the words myself in several successful narrative proposals. The city had agreed that we could use the wall of the Lions Club for the mural, but then it immediately granted permit to the medical center next door to expand the parking lot. A truck brought in 3 modular buildings in one day, creating an alley between the medical center and the mural. The public would never see our work. On the other hand, we had a county grant and perfect artistic freedom. I wanted to bring the mural into the present tense, break down some of the old romanticized imagery. There weren't even any redwoods on the res. It was a floodplain. Scarface had probably seen more bonobos on the Discovery Channel than salmon in the Res River. I told the kids, paint what you see around you, not what people tell you is there. One of the kids put his grandma on kidney dialysis smoking a pipe. Another contributed a kitchen sink with brown water running out of it. On Tuesday and Thursday afternoons, we painted in the shadows. At night, kids sold drugs and drank beer around the mural. I think they were drawn by the liminal quality of the space and by the mural itself, which every day became more complicated, beautiful, and difficult to read. Scarface didn't like to take the bus home. Kids teased him about the men who climbed through his mother's bedroom window. So after the first weekend of the mural, I drove him home. One time, we talked about the mural and the bonobos, and then Scarface shared some letters he said his girlfriend, Maria, had written to him. I probably shouldn't have let him go on, but his confidence and expression amazed me. Wasn't Scarface supposed to be illiterate? "You read those well," I said finally, and he said, "Well, I already know what they say." I pulled into his driveway. A dog stood on a car's roof in the yard, barking. A girl also stood in the yard, staring up into a pine tree. She had a round face and a round body and very long black hair that had been oiled for lice and pulled back into a bun. Her eyes were brown and deep. "My cousin," Scarface said, "Maria." "Scarface," the girl shouted, "your big brother threw my thong up into that tree." "Why don't you climb up and get it?" he said. "You don't know what's been in that tree," Maria said and grinned. Scarface flashed me a beautiful smile from his ugly mug and slammed the car door behind him. The last time my sister came to visit, she rode my bicycle into town every day and leaned it up against a tree behind the coffee house where she spent her mornings writing email and opening up her heart to the regulars. Carrie had always impressed people with her stories and with her resume, which she can recite like a villanelle. She suffered damage as a child from having been kissed and fondled by an uncle, which led to her radical identification with the oppressed. She worked at a rape crisis center and a suicide hotline, and then put herself through nursing and business school, overcame asthma and anorexia, studied French, and became the crusader she is today. Carrie lived and worked in 7 countries, 5 of them in Africa. We've had different experiences, different lives, Carrie and I. Carrie says no, we just have different stories of reality. I asked if she locked it, the bike, and she said, "The trouble with you is that you have no faith in people." When someone finally stole the bike, she called me for a ride home and refused to go back to my low-life town. Carrie's like that, rigid, unilateral. Love is a degraded word. I love my coffee in the morning. I love sunsets and those arias from Handel's operas sung by Renee Fleming that my ex-husband turned me on to. I feel a complicated mix of ambivalent affection for my sister, but the truth is I have never loved her, not even when we were children. Our Uncle Gene, a policeman, caused a scandal, statutory, which infected our whole family before my sister and I were born. He lost his job and even did time in prison. When my sister was coming up 3 years behind me, nobody wanted to open the old wounds. Uncle Gene wasn't young or handsome or powerful anymore. Carrie was large and quick enough to defend herself, or it was felt she ought to be. Even now, the words my sister uses to describe her life, molested, abandoned, alone, exposed, sound exaggerated. My sister always seemed dull and literal to me. I loved intrigue and secrets. Uncle Gene died of a gangrenous leg in Aunt Bee's living room. Aunt Bee was much older than she'd expected to be when he died, but still relieved. Within a month, though, she stopped breathing fluently and had to drag around a small oxygen tank. She said, "I know it sounds pathetic, but all I really want is a cigarette." From Aunt Bee, I learned that you could hate life and still love life. As far as I know, Uncle Gene never forced anybody into anything, but he was persuasive. He made girls feel something, and when they were really feeling it, Uncle Gene was there with his avuncular touch. He was, of course, a bad man, but just as great individuals are sometimes scarred by flaws, can't a bad man be varnished by qualities? Because of my experience with Uncle Gene, the playful banter, the pressure and pushback, the tickling, the touching, the lap sits, the terrible, interesting frankness of his desire, I understand boundaries and enjoy controlling them. Because of him, I'm not afraid of red zones in relations, just as my sister is drawn to her African hotspots. In the mural, I gave Uncle Gene a cameo, a little piece of the action, even though he isn't part of local history. I painted him lying on his back with his arms spread out, very flat and stylized, completely open. I could have emphasized his vulnerability or punished him in some way, had his liver pecked at by ravens. But what interests me about Uncle is not his amorality, it's his freedom. Thank you.